Welcome to Animal Posse, the podcast dedicated to the people and rescues making a difference in the lives of animals. Today's guest is Christie Keith. With over 30 years of experience, Christie helps animal welfare organizations sharpen their message and reach more donors. She's worked with industry leaders, and she's here to help us navigate some of the toughest conversations in rescue today. Christie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dixie.
You are quite a powerhouse in the animal welfare industry. I've been looking at your bio, and you have worked with some incredible organizations from Maddie's
I,
Fund to University of Florida Shelter Medicine Program. You do a lot.
I do. I've been really lucky to work with some great organizations and people in my career. Very lucky.
I am looking forward to our conversation today because I wanted to talk about a topic you suggested, which was handling the growing controversies surrounding early spay neuter through the lens of harm reduction. And I would also like to get into some social media strategies that you use to ensure that those save lives actually find homes.
I would love that. That sounds great.
When we hear about the growing debate about the long term health impacts of early spay neuter, how do we frame the harm reduction model for a public that only sees things in black and white?
I think that it's really important to think about who you're talking to. And I've noticed that there's a lot of argument going on within the animal welfare world about this because you have a lot of volunteers, fosters, and rescuers who have a different perspective because they have one foot in the pet owner world and one foot in the animal welfare world. And then you have shelters and shelter medicine experts who come from a more institutional perspective. And both of them have a set of data that it seems to be somewhat contradictory. And I've seen a lot of very hostile arguments. This has been about spay neuter and early spay neuter. And I've also seen it over early vaccination. There was a really interesting study that just came out of UC Davis last year talking about vaccinating literally newborn kittens and puppies, which horrified a lot of people who just felt that this was dangerous and risky. But when you're looking at the animals who come into shelters, a lot of the pregnant animals who come into shelters don't have immunity to these diseases. When they do titer tests on them, they find that a huge percentage of them, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I believe it was around one third, didn't have immunity to common diseases like distemper and parvo. And when you're making decisions about how to best protect these incredibly vulnerable kittens and puppies, it's a different decision-making process than when you're looking at owned pets in a home or 8-week-old or 12-week-old puppies. And it's same with spay neuter, that the math is different when you're talking about a shelter population than when you're talking about my own pet at home. I don't want to get them spayed or neutered at a few weeks old at 2 pounds. I'll wait. But in a shelter environment, you're crazy to wait because your math is different. And I feel like I've seen way too many hostile fights between people in animal welfare who don't seem to be able to look from the other person's point of view and understand that we all want what's best for the animals, but we all have different realities that we're making our decisions in. So I guess I just wanted an opportunity to talk about that a little bit and say, we can't have the same set of medical guidelines for shelter animals that we do for owned pets in homes because the circumstances aren't the same. Puppies and kittens in shelters are incredibly vulnerable to disease and are incredibly prone to going out of the shelter without being spayed and neutered if we're not doing early spay neuter on puppies and kittens, and possibly becoming another statistic in overpopulation. So we need to try and have a more holistic view of this issue and understand that sometimes the decisions that we make for shelter animals in their own best interest are different than the ones we would make for our own pets in our own homes.
When you say shelter environment, are you talking strictly about, say, like a municipal shelter, or are you talking about, say, rescues that house a lot of animals as well?
I think it depends on the environment. So when I say shelters, I'm talking about a sort of institutional setting where you have crowding and stress. It doesn't have to be municipal, it can be a private shelter, can even be foster homes. I think that you and I probably both know that some rescue groups overstock their foster homes because they're desperate, right? They have more animals than they have homes for, than they have foster homes for. They're trying to save as many lives as they can, and they may be doing things like bringing in young kittens when there's already kittens in the environment. They may be having pregnant cats and dogs who are giving birth in foster homes when there's other animals still coming in. It really just depends on the environment, but I am primarily talking about brick and mortar shelters rather than rescue and foster homes.
Yeah, I would definitely like to dive more into that. Now, I know from my personal perspective, the vets that we have in my area are very good. They will do a kitten as long as it's 2 pounds. And I know different vets have different rules. If a vet feels comfortable doing it at 2 pounds, great. Other vets have other rules where they might want them 3 pounds or even more than 3 pounds. And I understand that. But a lot of the vets that I work with will do them at 2 pounds. Personally, I find I like to get them done at 2 pounds because I find that they really don't know anything has been done to them. But if you wait till they're a little bit older, they have a little bit more difficulty with the recovery from it. You could tell that it's bothering them, it doesn't heal up as fast. But I would definitely like to dive more into the studies that you've gone over and the advantages and maybe disadvantages of doing them so young.
In the vaccine study that I was just looking at from last year from UC Davis, it was really interesting to me because they used language something along the lines of the risks are largely theoretical and the dangers are imminent. That might not be a direct quote, but that was essentially what they said when they're talking again about shelter animals, that the risk of being adopted out without being altered first, or the risk of this was a vaccine study. So they were talking about the risk of not vaccinating young enough because you can't count on the mother's immunity to protect the puppies or kittens outweighs the potential risk of, in the case of vaccines, they say if you vaccinate them too often or too young, it might damage their kidneys in adulthood. And they say that when you do early spay neuter, it is associated with the increased risk of certain health problems, which when you increase the risk of something, it doesn't mean that they will definitely get it. It doesn't even mean that it becomes a huge risk. It means that the risk itself is increased. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, there was a 50% increase in something. That's a meaningless statistic unless you know what the baseline risk was, because it may have increased by 100% and still not be that much because the risk itself was incredibly low already. So you have to really understand, what are you talking about when you say the risk of bone cancer or kidney disease is increased because of early vaccination or early spay neuter. Now, again, I believe in both sets of data. I think that there are drawbacks to early spay neuter, especially for giant breed dogs. I don't think that's made up, but I think that you have to weigh the benefits versus the risks. And those things change depending on the background that you're talking about. Again, puppies and kittens being adopted out of a shelter, it's much safer for them to be sterilized and vaccinated than to wait. It's just a fact. And maybe that any harm that might come to them down the road, which again is not something that will definitely happen, it might be worth the risk because you saved their life. If they're not going to survive, what difference does it make what their risk is later in a life they don't have?
When you're saying risk too, you're just talking about the risk of it increasing, not
Yes, the
necessarily the
potential.
yeah,
Yes.
okay. Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that. You said that there's this new study about vaccinating newborns. Okay,
Yes.
I do want to ask you about that since you've read this study. I do the bottle kittens. So I'm dealing with the tiniest little babies that you could possibly deal with. I've done newborns, I've done them a couple of weeks old. So when we're dealing with the babies that size, if they get sick, the amount of meds that the vet may tell us to give those babies is like such a minute amount. It is
Mm.
literally like a drop. So I know when you do the vaccines come as 1 ml. So would you give that whole amount to the baby? Or do you, like,
I
have to dose it down?
I'm not a veterinarian, but my understanding is that a vaccine is different from a drug. A vaccine is a biologic and it represents an immunizing dose. So when you put a puppy or kitten in the environment, the dose of exposure to a virus or a bacteria that they encounter is going to be the same whether they're the size of a peanut or a Great Dane, right? So you need to protect them with an immunizing dose. You need the dose that will cause their immune system to react appropriately. So it's not really the same as a drug, which has got a direct physiologic impact on body systems. Now, again, I'm not a veterinarian and I may be understanding that incorrectly, but that's how it's always been presented to me.
Okay, I understand. I was just wondering if the studies made any kind of mention of that, the ones that
This
you have read.
particular study does not. This study is called, you can find it, Neonatal Vaccination Recommendations on the UC Davis Correct Shelter Medicine Program website. And if you just Google correct and neonatal vaccination recommendations, it'll pop right up.
Now let's talk about the advantages. Since you've covered the disadvantages, let's go over some of the advantages of the very early spay neuter and then as well as the early vaccinations. And getting back to the spay neuter, since I did mention that they do them around 2 pounds, is there any talk about doing
Mhm.
them even like smaller?
I think that right now everybody's pretty much hovering at 2 pounds. I think that smaller than that, they can become hard to sterilize. It's harder to do the surgery, and they want them to be at about 2 pounds. But I think that there was a time when they wanted them to be 3 pounds, and they found that 2 pounds was actually easier. The surgeons were finding it easier. And as you noted, they recovered faster and more easily. And I think that some of this is just going to be a matter of learning as you go. But I know right now, as far as I'm aware, the 2 pound limit is pretty much universal at this point. The number one advantage in my mind is they're sterilized. They can't reproduce. And people want to adopt kittens when they're cute and little. They don't want to wait. They don't want to sit there and wait until they're 12 weeks old. They want them at 8 weeks. They want them young. And some rescues won't adopt them out that young, but shelters certainly do because they're better off in a home than they are in a shelter. I don't think people really understand how young a cat can get pregnant. I have found a lot of people think they can't get pregnant until they're 6 months old, and they can practically be grandmothers at 6 months old. I don't mean that literally, of course, but you really have to try and wrap your brain around how much risk a cat is at as teen pregnancy to understand why it's so important to spay them young and spay them before they're adopted. And so pet overpopulation, preventing unwanted litters is without question the single biggest benefit of early spay neuter. However, surgeons comment that the surgery is easier, and many people involved with helping them recover say recovery is also easier on these very young kittens and puppies. And for this reason, I'm talking a lot about kittens because they're smaller. Of course, there are toy dogs, but most dogs that are in shelters are bigger dogs. And so, of course, they're larger when they're the same age as the kitten. They're much bigger than the kitten. So people don't react to it as negatively. But in fact, many of the risks are greater with dogs, especially the larger dogs, of orthopedic problems associated with early spay neuter. So there is a lot of argument going on about whether or not the risks outweigh the benefits, but you only have to understand that medium to large size dogs represent most of the dogs in shelters. And these dogs are young, intact, and a huge percentage of them do not have immunity to common diseases. So this is a very at risk population that could have been prevented. A lot of their challenges could have been prevented with early spay neuter, either because they wouldn't have been born in the first place or because that individual dog would have fewer behavior issues. A lot of times, I don't want to say that intact status directly causes behavior problems because that really hasn't been my experience with at least dogs that I've known. But what I will say is that there's an association of dogs entering shelters with dogs not being intact, well, with dogs who are intact. So intact dogs are more likely to come into shelters, and intact dogs are more likely not to be immune to common diseases. So it's a perfect storm of vulnerability and problems. So early spay neuter, again, steps in and prevents a lot of these problems from happening.
Yeah, and I think even a lot of times, especially like you said, with the cats and the kittens getting pregnant at 4 months, even people with the best intentions, I don't think they always understand. They may be 100% pro spay neuter, but when they get a kitten and it's 3 months old and they say, okay, we're going to keep it inside, we're not going to let it outside, we want an indoor only cat. I don't think that they realize a lot of the times when they come into maturity that they're trying to get outside and they will find a
Right.
way to sneak outside. And when they are tiny, they're easier to sneak outside than when it is a big cat, even though the big cats can do it too. And so
That's right.
I find that's definitely an issue. I've seen that happen many a times when people are like, we had the spay neuter appointment set up and she got outside.
Yeah, you hear that a lot when you have these very young cats having kittens. You have people who say not only did they not know they could get pregnant that young, but I can't tell you how many litters of kittens I've seen where the people swore that they were indoor only cats who were too young to get pregnant. And they couldn't believe that it had happened.
When you're working with all of these groups, do you
Mm.
help to educate them about these new findings, or are they the ones approaching you with it?
They're the ones who educate me. I've been so lucky to work with so many great shelter medicine vets. I was the communications manager for the Million Cat Challenge, which was a joint project of the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program and the University of Florida Shelter Medicine Program. This was a Maddie's Fund project. And so much of what I learned about cat spay neuter and just cat population management in general was from the 7 years that I worked on that project. It was an incredible opportunity to learn from people who are truly in the trenches and really know what's going on. And just Dr. Kate Hurley and Dr. Julie Levy are two of my heroes, and working with them was the honor of a lifetime.
I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit now
Mm.
about the social media.
Yes.
Okay, because one thing, so first, you, of course, you want to use social media to get homes.
Yes.
You also want to use social media to spread awareness of spay neuter.
Yes.
But I find that, like for me personally, it's like all of my social media friends and all the people that follow my social media page are pretty much all people that are already all on board with this and they are at their
Mm, mhm.
capacity of animals. So, how can you leverage social media to get that message across to new people, to find more homes for animals, to spread more awareness of spay neuter?
That's such a great question, Dixie. I love that you asked it. I think there's two answers to it. One of them has to do with what you're saying, and the other has to do with the channels that you're using. Not you personally, but just all of us in animal welfare. I think that sometimes we are just preaching to the choir, both in terms of what we're saying and in terms of who we're talking to. And by being able to spread out and try and get our message in front of an audience who's not sick and tired of hearing about it is tricky. And I've noticed a lot of benefit to posting to local groups like Nextdoor and groups that are set up to like community groups, like for a particular town. We have a lot of them in the area where I live on Facebook, for example, where you'll have a Facebook group for this town or that town. And that there's a lot of people who like to spread animal welfare messages. But those audiences respond to different things than animal welfare audiences respond to. And this is something that I've been talking about now for probably 15 years, is that we talk in ways that appeal to us and activate us and motivate us. But we have to start talking in ways that motivate not us, that motivate regular people. One of my colleagues is Sharon Fletcher at Maddie's Fund, and she used to always say she would talk to her neighbors and she would run messaging by her neighbors. And we started calling it the Sharon's Neighbors Test. And I still use it to this day. And I say, okay, what would Sharon's neighbors say about this? Or how would they hear this information? And I was on a really interesting call the other day. I'm the Michigan State representative for the United Spay Alliance. And I went to a United Spay Alliance meeting and we were talking about messaging around spay neuter. And someone made the comment that spay neuter isn't sexy and it's really hard to message spay neuter to the general public. And I was thinking about it a lot and talking it over with another colleague. And we were saying spay neuter is sexy. There's a lot of really powerful stories around spay neuter. The pet overpopulation story is powerful, but there's the health benefits story. And there's, because we talk about the health risks of early spay neuter, but spay neuter itself in general does have a cumulative positive impact on health and longevity, especially in dogs. And you can reach people with messages that touch on preventing homelessness and suffering, preventing health problems. You can really get to people and make them think, whereas so often when we message spay neuter, we do it in this really lecturing way that is not very sexy. It's not very interesting and appealing. It doesn't touch people's hearts. It doesn't tell people what's in it for them. It misses all the opportunities that we've learned about in public speaking and persuasion to really grab people by their hearts and make them understand something in a different way. So is the same with adoption. We tend to tell these heartbreaking stories about our animals because those are very motivational for a rescue audience. And a lot of times that's who we're talking to. The average people want happy, healthy pets who are going to sleep at the foot of their kids' beds. They don't want a project. They don't want a pet who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They want a moment of happiness and joy. That's what they want. I'm not saying that people can't be reached by heartbreaking stories. We all know that they can. I'm saying that the more you tell those stories, you run the risk of poisoning the well for adoption for people who aren't looking for that, who outnumber the people who are looking for that project pet or that heartbreaking story to feel like they've rescued an animal. PetSmart Charities did some interesting research on this. And again, I don't have the research in front of me. I can't quote from it directly, but they were talking about what it was that people were looking for in a pet and all the things that motivated them to want that pet. The story, the pet's background story was the least important. And humorously enough, the number one thing that they liked about a dog was that the dog jumped on them. So we spend all this time training dogs not to jump on people. The doctors seem to like. But yeah, so I think that we really need to be very conscious of the audience when we're trying to get our message out beyond our core following to look for these opportunities to put the message in a different place, a place that's not already saturated with our messaging, but to talk about it in ways that appeal to the general public who are looking for these joyful experiences and humor. One of my clients for 14 years was the Shelter Pet Project, which was the Ad Council's public service advertising campaign. And all our ads were funny or heartwarming. And we never did any sad, or the first set of ads that we did were all very humorous. And we got a lot of attention for that because this was back in, I'm just trying to think what year it must have been. Must have been maybe the early 2000s, I'm thinking. We were mid 2000s. And it was really uncommon at that point for people to do ads for pet adoption that weren't heartbreaking. Arms of the Angels and all that, which, to be fair, are mostly fundraising ads, not adoption ads. But in rescue, I'm sure you've seen just the avalanche of stories of this tragic background that the pet has and how we're going to save them from this terrible trauma. And we really become overly reliant on that as the only note that we have. And to remember that humor and touching people's hearts in a positive way is more popular.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I can actually see that now that you mentioned that, because if you do have that heartstring case, that you tend to attract somebody that has a rescue pet, essentially. Now, I'm going to say, like, in some special needs cases, that might be who you want to attract anyway. So, in that approach, it might be
Absolutely.
good. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but for the general adoptions, I can see that. If you say, "Oh, I rescued these puppies off the side of the road and they need homes," and think people sometimes might think, "Why were they on the side of the road? Was there something wrong with them? So maybe that's not a good choice for us." So I can see what
Mhm.
if you frame it in a more positive light, how it would attract different people.
Soccer moms.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
I
always
can
top
see
in my
that.
head is, yeah, exactly, exactly. And there's more of them. They outnumber us.
Yeah, yeah,
Bigger audience.
and I will say too that I've noticed on my latest adoptions have a good sense of humor. So I tend to do a more comical twist on things. So I do see that since I've started doing and letting my kind of humor come out, that I do see my adoption rates are going up, and then I'm also getting adopted faster. Another thing that I would like to ask you too is I see on your LinkedIn that you're a Reagan AI certified communicator.
Yes, I
Okay.
am.
So what is that?
So I took a course, a certification course in working with AI. I was very interested in it when it first appeared on the scene, and some of the negative things that we've learned about AI since then have maybe given me a little bit of pause, but I still think that it's a really powerful tool for animal welfare, especially when nonprofits in general, but animal welfare specifically, because we run so lean in terms of only the biggest shelters have an entire communications team or marketing team. And rescue groups often don't have anyone with marketing or communications experience, and they still have marketing and communications needs. So I wanted to be able to really understand how I could advise people to use AI to write adoption listings, pet bios, social media posts, newsletters, fundraising appeals, grant applications, all the things that AI can help you with. I wanted to be sure that I knew how to advise them to use those things or avoid them, and how to avoid making mistakes with them, and how to get the most out of an interaction with an artificial intelligence, because what you put into it determines what you get out of it. but it is still a huge time and money saver for nonprofits. So I really wanted to pursue that so that I could bring that to the table with my clients and make sure that they got the benefits of working with AI if it would help them.
Has it been beneficial to them in terms of writing adoption bios and maybe social media posts?
I don't know. I can tell when I'm on Pet Finder when bios have been written by AI. They're just obvious. I don't know if it matters. Sometimes I think that we need to spend more time educating people on how to write good AI prompts. And because they're just going in and they're not giving the AI the right information to really produce good results. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think that other times it's like plastic surgery. The ones and you notice are the bad ones, but the good ones you don't know because you can't tell. I think that's probably true of AI too. There's probably really good work being done out there that is invisible because it's so good. And so I'm not 100% sure, but of my clients, I try to work with them on how they do their prompts. That's the number one thing I work with them on.
And one more thing, too, before we end the call that I would like to touch on is negative comments
Yes.
on social media. How do you handle those? What is the best way to handle that? Whether it's you're either promoting spay neuter and somebody has that negative comment to say, or somebody gets mad because they want to adopt from you and either that animal has already been adopted or you might not think they're a good fit for that animal.
I have become much more hard-assed about this in my old age here. I used to be much more soft about it, but I've seen way too many derailments of people's social media platforms by people who weren't being genuine, who were just stirring up trouble. So when you get a negative comment, it might be the most valuable thing that your organization will ever get. It's the cheapest focus group you'll ever have is someone pointing out a problem, saying to you, why did you do this? What is happening? I went on your website and I saw this and I don't understand. Why are you spay and neutering at 2 pounds, it's terrible, whatever the negative comment is, this is really useful information for you and you should be grateful for it. And so I always say the first thing you do when you get a sincere negative comment, like something that doesn't appear to be trolling, is you say, "Thank you very much for bringing this to my attention." And then you say something like, "We would love," it depends on what they said. You can either say, this is what we do because this is the recommendation of the Association of Shelter Veterinarians or something appropriate and fairly short. Sometimes it's appropriate to say, please contact so and so at such and such email address so we can get to the bottom of this with you. That might be more appropriate for a customer service type complaint where they say I left a message and no one called me back, or I filled out an adoption application and I never heard from anyone or something like that. You might want to get them off social media and direct them to an email address so that this isn't happening in public. But for trolling comments, your response is not going to be for them because they're not a sincere player in the conversation. They are just there to make trouble. And what I do with them is I make one answer that sounds sincere and polite and even welcoming because I'm not answering it for them. I'm answering it for all the people reading it. And then I delete everything after that because we're done. It's over. And if it becomes a really hotbed of flames and I can't control it anymore, I just delete the original comment. I didn't used to be like that. I used to feel like we shouldn't be deleting all these comments, and now I'm just like, if they're not sincere, if they're just there to make trouble, they don't need to do it on my real estate. So I usually advise people to be pretty tough with trolling comments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What would you say about the ones that say they fill out an adoption application, you call them up, but you tell them, hey, this animal is not a good fit for your family. We're not approving your application. Because I do see that a lot where a lot of them will go on to rescue pages and they'll try to get their friends on there too to say, go leave bad reviews and do things like that. So, how would you
Yeah,
handle those?
that's so difficult because there's so many channels for them to leave bad reviews too. It's not just social media, it's also Google reviews and Yelp reviews, and it can become really time consuming for a small nonprofit, especially to track all these things down. But usually I would say, first of all, I always try to frame turn downs as positively as possible. So let's say someone has tried to adopt a specific cat and you don't think that cat would be a good fit with this family. I would just try to steer them to another cat. Unfortunately, sometimes you wouldn't adopt them at all. And you're just turning them down, and inevitably people are gonna be upset about that because no one likes rejection. So you are inevitably going to face this problem, and I would say, "I'm very sorry that this didn't work out for you and us. Please contact us at this email address and try and get it off social media." And then I would also leave responses to like, one of the things that I recommend that people do for reputation management is to answer their reviews. And I always would say, "We're so sorry that this didn't work out. We hope that we wish you luck in your search for a new pet." Because again, it's not for them. Nothing that you say is gonna satisfy them. They're not there to be satisfied. They're upset. They're lashing out, and they blame you. And they feel like they're being told they're a bad pet owner and irresponsible and all kinds of terrible things. And there's not really nothing you can do about that except be professional and try to keep it from taking over your social media, which is hard because, like you said, they'll drag their friends in on it and they'll also post lies. And that's another thing that I recommend doing is saying, we've gone through our records and we don't have any record of an adoption application from anyone with your name. Can you let us know what name your adoption application was made under so we can get to the bottom of this? Because what you're doing there is signaling to the public who maybe is reading these reviews that the person is fake without coming right out and saying the person is fake. And usually they don't answer you. So your response is just hanging there. You responded, you were professional, you signaled that they were fake. You didn't say anything objectionable. That's the best you can do in that circumstance. But that would be for a review more so than a social media post.
Yeah, it's very good advice. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, Dixie, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed speaking with you too.
That's it for today's episode of Animal Posse. If you love what we're doing, please consider becoming a member. Your support directly helps us continue highlighting the people and stories that save lives across the country. Just a quick reminder, the views and opinions expressed by our guests are theirs alone and are provided for entertainment purposes. They don't necessarily reflect the official position of the show, and this information should never replace the advice of your own veterinarian. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bars in the night, claws in the fight, whiskers twitch and tails take flight. They're calling in stories to spin. The heart within. Broken wings and hopeful springs. We're the voices for these things. Animal Posse, hear the call. We stand together, big and small. Rescue tales, we've got it all. Animal Posse, saving them all. The vet's got tips, the rescuer's grit, the foster homes where love won't quit. From a pup in the rain to a bird in pain, every soul's worth the strain. Animal Posse, hear the call. We stand
rise up, we never fail. This is the bond, the holy